Do I have to reconcile if I forgive them? This is one of the most important questions people of faith need to understand. Because a lot of people have been taught that forgiveness and reconciliation are basically the same thing. So, if you forgive someone, you go back. If you forgive someone, you trust them again. If you forgive someone, you stop talking about what happened. If you forgive someone, you remove the boundary. If you forgive someone, you give the relationship another chance. Do these sound familiar? And if you don't do those things, people may say, you haven't really forgiven. You're holding a grudge. You're bitter. You're not being Christ-like. You need to just let it go. But here's the problem. That is not forgiveness. That is pressure. And it confuses two things that are deeply connected, but not the same. So welcome to Cleave Answers, where we give clear, faith-grounded answers to the hardest questions about family, boundaries, estrangement, reconciliation, and healing. And today we're talking about this question: do I have to reconcile if I forgive them? The simple answer is no. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Forgiveness is something that Christ asks of us. But reconciliation, it requires repentance. It requires honesty. It requires humility. It requires accountability. It requires repair. It requires safety. And ultimately, it requires changed behavior. Forgiveness can happen in your heart before the relationship is restored. But reconciliation requires the relationship itself to become healthy enough to restore. And that distinction, well, it changes everything. Because if we confuse forgiveness with reconciliation, then wounded people end up feeling spiritually obligated to re-enter unsafe relationships before there has been truth, repentance, or repair. And that is not healing. That is denial. Forgiveness is about releasing your claim to revenge. It is about refusing to let bitterness govern your heart. It is about giving judgment to God. It is about allowing Christ to free you from hatred. It is about saying, I will not let what happened to me turn me into someone I do not want to become. But forgiveness does not mean pretending. It does not mean minimizing. It does not mean trusting someone who has not become trustworthy. It does not mean giving access to someone who continues to cause harm. It does not mean erasing consequences. And it does not mean calling something safe just because you have chosen to release bitterness. So here are a few things I would remember. First, forgiveness is personal. Reconciliation is relational. Forgiveness can happen between you and God. It can happen in your heart. It can happen even if the other person never apologizes. It can happen even if they never understand what they did. It can happen even if they never take accountability. But reconciliation, it requires both people to participate in truth. A relationship cannot be reconciled by one person alone. You can choose forgiveness, but you cannot single-handedly create reconciliation without someone who refuses, or with someone who refuses honesty, repentance, humility, or repair. That is why it's so painful. Because sometimes the person who caused the harm wants the benefits of reconciliation without actually doing the work of repentance. They want closeness without accountability. They want access without change. They want everyone to move on without ever telling the truth about what happened. But that is not reconciliation. That is a reset button. And a reset button is not the same thing as repair. Second, forgiveness does not automatically restore trust. Trust is not restored because someone says, I'm sorry. Trust is restored through consistent changed behavior over time. A person can be forgiven before they are trusted. A person can be loved before they are given access. A person can be prayed for before they are brought back into your inner circle. And this really matters because some people use forgiveness to demand immediate trust. They say, if you forgave me, you would stop bringing it up. If you forgave me, you would let me see the kids. If you forgave me, you would come to Thanksgiving. If you forgave me, things would go back to normal. But forgiveness does not mean things go back to normal, especially if normal was actually the problem. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is to forgive someone while refusing to rebuild the relationship on the same foundation that caused the harm in the first place. Third, reconciliation requires repentance, not just regret. Regret says, I feel bad that there are consequences. Repentance says, I see the harm I caused, and I am willing to change. Regret is often focused on losing access. Repentance is focused on repairing harm. Regret says, can we just move on? Repentance says, help me understand what I did and how I can make it right. Regret is uncomfortable with consequences. Repentance accepts consequences as a part of repair. And this is where so many relationships get stuck. Because someone may say the words, I'm sorry, but still blame you for being hurt. They may apologize, but still minimize. They may cry, but still deny. They may say they want the relationship, but they still refuse to tell the truth. They may want peace, but not repentance. And without repentance, reconciliation is not safe. Fourth, forgiveness does not remove consequences. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings. People often think if forgiveness has happened, then consequences should suddenly disappear. But that is not how healthy relationships work. You can forgive someone and still change the level of access they have to your life. You can forgive someone and still keep the boundary. You can forgive someone and still say, I am not ready to be close. You can forgive someone and still say, you cannot speak to me that way. You can forgive someone and still say, my children will not be exposed to that pattern. You can forgive someone and still require evidence of change before trust is ultimately rebuilt. Consequences are not always punishment. Sometimes consequences are protection. Sometimes consequences are wisdom. Sometimes consequences are what love looks like when the pattern had become unsafe. And fifth, reconciliation should produce better fruit, not just less conflict. A lot of families confuse reconciliation with silence. Nobody talks about what happened. Nobody names the harm. Nobody asks for accountability. Everyone just gets back into the room together, and they call that reconciliation. But if the old pattern is still there, that is not reconciliation. That is simply proximity. True reconciliation should produce better fruit, more honesty, more humility, more safety, more respect, more responsibility, more tenderness, more truth, more willingness to repair. If the only way to have peace is for you to go silent about the harm, then that is not peace. That is emotional hostage taking. And Christ never asked us to live in denial to keep other people comfortable. He asked us to live in truth. Now, this does not mean we should be hard-hearted. It does not mean we should refuse repair. It does not mean we should enjoy distance. It does not mean we should punish people forever. As followers of Christ, we should always remain open to real repentance, real humility, real repair, and real change. But being open to reconciliation is not the same as pretending reconciliation has already happened. That is ultimately a key distinction. You can have a heart that is open and still have a boundary that is firm. We'll just let that sit for a minute. You can hope for healing and still require safety. You can pray for someone and still not give them access. You can say the door is open to a healthier relationship, while also saying the door is not open to the same destructive pattern. That is not bitterness. That is discernment. So, do you have to reconcile if you forgive them? The answer, of course, is no. You are commanded to forgive. You are invited to release bitterness. You are invited to give judgment to God. You are invited to let Christ heal your heart. But you are not required to pretend that an unsafe relationship is safe. You are not required to trust someone who has not become trustworthy. You are not required to give access to someone who has not taken accountability. You are not required to sacrifice your marriage, your children, your peace, or your emotional health to prove that you have forgiven. Forgiveness is about your heart. Reconciliation is about the health of the relationship. And if there has not been repentance, accountability, repair, humility, and changed behavior, then reconciliation may not be wise yet. So instead of asking only, have I forgiven them? Ask yourself this question. Has this relationship become honest? Has there been accountability? Has there been repentance? Has there been repair? Has trust actually been rebuilt? Is there safety? Is the fruit different now? Because if the fruit has not changed, then going back may not be reconciliation. It may just be returning to the same pattern with religious language placed on top of it. And that is not what Christ asks of you. Christ asks us to forgive, but he also asks us to walk in truth. And sometimes truth says, I forgive you. I love you. I am not holding hatred in my heart, but this relationship has not become safe enough to restore. That sentence may be one of the most faithful things that you ever say. And if this video gives you clarity, we invite you to subscribe for more of Cleave Answers, where we talk about faith, family boundaries, estrangement, reconciliation, and of course, healing. And if you're walking through this right now, Ashley and I wrote the book Leave Then Cleave to help people of faith understand how to protect their marriage, their children, and their peace without losing their faith. You can grab a free chapter through the link below. And in the next Cleave Answers video, we're going to be talking about another question that we hear all the time. What does honor thy father and mother really mean? Stay tuned for that next.